investing. We are investing in health care, we are investing in education, we are investing in roads, we are investing in good training and job development opportunities for people in our province. And Mr. Speaker, in the 3 years that we've been in government, we've brought our department spending in every year on or under budget. There has not been the $1.3 billion of unplanned and unbudgeted spending that we saw in the previous MacDonald government, of which that member was a member.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm looking forward to civil debate with the Minister for Communities, Culture and Heritage. Mr. Speaker, Safe Gaming Systems, a company from Las Vegas, has taken TechLink International Entertainment to court. The Atlantic Lotto Corporation, Nova Scotia Provincial Lotteries, Casino Corporation, what used to be Nova Scotia Gaming Corporation, are also defendants along with TechLink. Mr. Speaker, Safe Gaming Systems claims patent infringement on their product, which is similar to the MyPlace system that the province implemented. My question for the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage: why did the department fail to conduct a thorough analysis and patent search before implementing MyPlay province-wide?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you know, Nova Scotians care deeply about our gaming industries and our gaming strategy. Most of all, they've told us they want us to have responsible gaming, that they want it to be socially responsible, that they want it to be fiscally responsible, and they want it to be managed effectively. And certainly that's what this government is doing, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the findings of this court case have the potential to put jobs at risk. If this government had done its due diligence, the workers in Cape Breton would not be in this precarious situation today. Instead of putting into work to ensure that this would be a sound investment for Nova Scotia, this government was too eager to put out a gambling system, a system that wasn't made fully mandatory. My question to the Minister: what protections are in place for the workers in Cape Breton that this government has placed at risk with their lack of due diligence?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you know, when that lot was in office, the Nova Scotians were at risk. There was a great spread of VLTs all over the province. There were VLTs in corner stores and in bars, and we rolled that back. We said we would do that, Mr. Speaker, and we did it. And that's responsible, and that's the risk that we avoided when we threw those guys out.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Taxpayers have invested millions into this company, and there are now jobs at risk. And the province even holds an equity stake in TechLink, all for lack of due diligence on the part of the NDP. My question to the Minister: what steps has the Minister taken to mitigate the risk as a result of their previous lack of due diligence?
The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The policies we enacted to deal with the risk was we reduced the number of VLTs in play. We introduced the MyPlay system, which reduced the numbers of people, advised people of what they were exposing themselves to. We provided better training for people who were involved in the gaming industries. Those are the concrete steps we took, Mr. Speaker, to reduce the risk that member speaks about.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation. Contrary to popular belief, Nova Scotia Aboriginals pay taxes. They pay sales tax on virtually everything they buy. They pay fuel, alcohol, and tobacco excise taxes, air travelers tax, income tax on most income earned off the reserve. These people are counted when we receive equalization payments, giving Nova Scotia more federal tax revenue. These are tax-paying Nova Scotians. Why won't this government pave roads and reserves?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. I can say that, of course, it's only been a short time since I've been Minister of Transportation, but this is not an issue that's been presented to me by anyone. And I've met with several chiefs, Chief Julian at Buckton Keg, that's not been raised. I've met with the chief at Escazone. That issue has not been raised. It's simply an issue that's never been brought forward to me as an issue. So if my friend has a particular case that he wants me to look at or to address, I'd be pleased to do that. If he wants to develop that issue with me, I'll look at that as well. But at this stage, it's not something that's been brought forward to me. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the minister that the issue has been brought forward to his department. I've tried just about everything I can do, Mr. Speaker, and that's why I've chosen to bring it forward here as a last resort. Mr. Speaker, I guess what we're wondering here is, and when I'm thinking about this, are we saying that these people are not Nova Scotians? Are we saying that these people do not deserve pavement in their communities? And if the members agree that that's not the case, then I think we need to start looking at this. If these people are paying their taxes, why not get past the policy roadblocks, which I have encountered as I brought the matter forward to the department, and do the right thing and share the paving budget with our Aboriginal communities?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I, of course, am somewhat offended by the suggestion that because there's an issue that perhaps, and I should just let me set the record straight. I have been the minister since May 29th. I read every piece of correspondence that comes to my office. If the member opposite is saying that he's been diligent in getting in touch with me, nothing has come in since that date to deal with this issue. But I do want to address the point about the status of our Aboriginal people in this province. They're the First Nations people. They're more Nova Scotians than any of us are. And my position is that on this point again, if it's an issue that he's brought forward, somehow it hasn't got to my desk. He's never spoken to me about it. He's never called me about it. He's never written me about it. So if he wants to have that opportunity to meet with me and to deal with this issue, I'm prepared to do that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Inverness on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in fairness to the minister, I haven't contacted him directly, and it's important that we put that on the record. But if he does a little bit of investigation, he'll see that it has been brought forward before to the government, and I'll leave it at that for the record. But Mr. Speaker, it seems our Aboriginal people always have to go to court to get everything, and that's something they've told me. That's how they feel. Now, and that's how they feel. They've told me that. They always feel like to get anything from the government in this province, they have to go to the court. And I'm not just talking about this government. Obviously, Mr. Speaker, the government members are sensitive to this, and they should be. I hope after today they take a serious look at this issue. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister take advantage of the position he now holds? He spent a career working in legal aid. And, Mr. Speaker, I think there's an opportunity for government to show some goodwill towards these people. Will he take advantage of the position he now holds and acknowledge that our Aboriginal people deserve the same benefits entitled to all other Nova Scotians, and that includes paving roads in their communities?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will point out to the member opposite. I recently, within the last month, attended a cabinet and Chiefs Conference that was held in the Truro area. And every chief in Nova Scotia attended, and all of the cabinet was was there. This was not an issue that was brought forward at that meeting. It was not an issue that was on the agenda. We meet regularly with the chiefs. I can tell the member opposite that in my local community, the community that I represent, Buckton Keg Native community, we are working with them on projects, on infrastructure transportation and infrastructure initiatives, and they're very pleased with the progress we're making on that front. That's the proof that I have to indicate that this is an issue that seems to be, to me, it's a fresh one, but I have been given an opportunity to speak about these issues, and it has not come up. Thank you.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On November 15, 2012, Chronicle Herald story noted the province was planning on turning to the President of Acadia to head a task force on how to revive the rural economy. All of a sudden, this government and this minister have caught on to what we've been telling them for 3 years. On December 10th, 2010, the Economic Development Minister said, quote, "What we have done with jobs here is we've created a future for the province of Nova Scotia based on innovation and certainly on education, giving people the skills for good jobs in the future. Jobs here now will go a long way in advancing the causes here in the province of Nova Scotia," end quote. So my question for the Economic Development Minister, if the minister is so proud of his accomplishments and his record with jobs here and in rural Nova Scotia, why does he need a task force?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
You know, Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we've always maintained, and I've always said, is that as good as we are, we always look for ways to be better. And you know what? I think the Liberal Party has a huge problem with that, Mr. Speaker. We continue to try to improve on what we've got, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this minister is forming a task force on economic development in rural Nova Scotia because he's failed the economy and he has nowhere to turn. And I've got to be thinking he's getting pretty close to being out of taxpayers' money, Mr. Speaker, so of course he needs some advice from the pros on how to do it. When facing questions about rural Nova Scotia, on October 23rd, 2011, the Premier said, quote, "We are responding to those requests. We are growing the economy. We are creating good jobs," end quote. Except now, we know that in the last 3 years, 8,200 Nova Scotians have left rural towns and communities. We know that rural Nova Scotia has shed 3,200 jobs, and we know that unemployment in rural Nova Scotia is well above 10%. This government's corporate welfare-driven economic development strategy brought rural Nova Scotia double-digit unemployment, Mr. Speaker, increasing out migration and fewer job opportunities. Now, 3.5 years after taking office, this government launches a task force to tell them how to fix the problems in rural Nova Scotia that they created. So my question to the minister, now that the NDP needs a task force to fix Nova Scotia's rural economy, will the minister explain why he has told us for 3 years that things are getting better when clearly they are not?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this government announced 3 weeks ago of nearly 1,000 jobs coming to Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, good jobs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of those companies being IBM that's going to have a global centre here in Halifax. Now, Mr. Speaker, they could have set up anywheres in the world, Mr. Speaker. They chose the province of Nova Scotia to set up, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is enormous. Mr. Speaker, they are not the only ones. We are attracting, you know what, I don't know why the Liberal Party continues to knock good jobs coming to the province of Nova Scotia and trying so hard to tarnish Nova Scotia's image globally. I don't understand this, Mr. Speaker, except job terminators, Mr. Speaker, job terminators.
The honourable member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
What sends signals about the economy and economic decisions for a province, Mr. Speaker, is when a minister and a premier and a government give $11 million to a Calgary-based firm to compete in a sector, engineering consulting, that is growing right now with Nova Scotia products. On October 23rd, 2011, the Economic Development Minister said, quote, "What I will acknowledge is that this government has a plan. We are sticking to that plan. The plan is working. For the first time, we've built on that plan," end quote. It now appears that the government is getting ready to throw that plan out, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the minister, if the minister is so confident in his jobs here strategy, why does he need a task force to bail out the mess he created?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, the task force aligns with the Jobs Here strategy, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can appreciate that the member from Glace May doesn't understand that because, you know, he's never read the plan. You know, we've made offers for him to come over to the office to sit down with staff to explain the plan to him. Now, he knows the plan's different because we are doing things in the best interest of Nova Scotians. We are building a Nova Scotia. We are building a Nova Scotia for the future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, something that government in the past failed to do, Mr. Speaker, but we are doing it. We are doing it.
Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Mr. Speaker, in the fall 2012 Auditor General's report, the Auditor General noted, quote, Trade Centre Limited does not have adequate internal control framework or sufficiently rigorous financial management processes, unquote, and I'll table that. The Economic Development Minister is responsible for oversight at the Trade Centre. So, Mr. Speaker, why does the Minister hand this organization $4.8 million without ensuring it has the appropriate and rigorous financial controls required?
Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that particular question, is that we have great respect for the Auditor General, and we've acted on the Auditor General's recommendations. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, I can stand in my place and say that we started implementing things for the Trade Centre around controls before we even received the Auditor General's report, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think a lot of people will be surprised to hear that, including the people at Trade Centre Limited who said in response to the Auditor General's report that there was no need for changes and that they didn't need to implement any. So they're saying they're not. The Minister says there is. Mr. Speaker, in the document I just tabled, the Auditor General said, quote, Trade Centre Limited does not have adequate processes for the approval of travel and business expenses. The CEO's expenses were not reviewed or approved, and a number of paid claims were not supported by appropriate documentation. Trade Centre Limited's business travel and expense policy is not consistent with the government travel policy. So, Mr. Speaker, this minister has given them $4.8 million after already hearing about these issues previously. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister require that any overpayments or unapproved expenses are reimbursed to taxpayers?
Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development.
Mr. Speaker, the Trade Centre Limited, through Economic and Rural Development and Tourism, has already implemented 12 of the 19 recommendations coming from the Auditor General, Mr. Speaker, and I can stand in my place and tell you that they're in process of completing the other 7, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East on his final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, maybe the minister would like to name those. Mr. Speaker, the minister has been aware of this for some time. In fact, in June 15th, 2011, the minister was questioned about this in the media, and he said, quote, I've got great confidence in Scott Ferguson. I think he's doing a wonderful job for the province and the World Trade Centre. Scott Ferguson thought he was acting appropriately and thought he was being prudent. The Economic Minister, Development Minister then went on to say Ferguson was doing, quote, a wonderful job. The Auditor General clearly disagrees. Mr. Speaker, does the minister still defend the financial management of Mr. Ferguson and Trade Centre management?
The Honourable Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes.
The Honourable Member for Preston.
Mr. Speaker, the Pictou County Injured Workers Association recently sent a letter to all members of this House. This letter raised concerns that the association will not be able to meet their needs of their clients because of underfunding by this NDP government. My question is to Minister of Labour. How does the minister expect the association to meet the needs of the injured workers with little or no support from her department?
I hope he's not texting you up there. Okay. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not uncommon for nonprofit organizations and community groups to want more funding from provincial governments. Certainly a few years ago, the Injured Workers Associations in Nova Scotia were getting about $20,000 a year in funding provincially, and it is now up to $100,000 with the ability to also access extra funding for specific initiatives or projects that would improve their effectiveness in terms of serving injured workers. And we have ongoing discussions with them about their mandate, their operation. We've started to meet as a forum to talk about some of those issues. But certainly we feel at the time this is what the taxpayers can afford. Thank you.
The honourable member for Preston on his first supplementary.
The association serves over 400 clients, but only has a budget for 120. This NDP minister refused to increase funding. Instead, she told the association they will have to divert their clients to other bodies. The minister is telling injured workers that they're on their own and have to go elsewhere for support. Why doesn't this government increase funding to the Pictou County Workers Association so they can continue to serve their injured workers?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I mentioned in my earlier answer, we have significantly increased the funding available to injured workers associations in this province. We continue to work alongside them. There are other bodies that also provide advice and support to injured workers in terms of working through the workers' compensation processes. And all I did was suggest in that meeting that we need to better coordinate everyone's efforts so that that we get the best bang for our buck in terms of supporting injured workers in this province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Preston on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, in a letter of November 6, the Pictou County Injured Workers Association writes, quote, "The workers' compensation system is broken and requires your action to fix it," end of quote, and I'll table that letter. Mr. Speaker, a review is not enough. After 3 years of inaction by this minister, it is time that she stop stalling and actually get to work. When can the injured workers expect this NDP minister to finally take action and fix the workers' compensation system?
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's a much broader issue. I have to say that I do meet on a very regular basis with the chair and the CEO of the Workers' Compensation Board. I meet regularly with injured workers associations and all the affiliated interest groups. We have a strong working relationship, and certainly we're listening carefully. The Workers' Compensation Board has accepted with their huge unfunded liability that they're in a very difficult position. Of course, they want to improve benefits to injured workers in this province, but at the same time, they have a responsibility for the unfunded liability. And you can't increase benefits on income that is not there. So this is a huge challenge. Mostly the result of the recession and the poor market conditions, but we're certainly working closely with WCB. They make quarterly reports. They're accountable to and certainly provide that information to all members of this House. And we will continue that strong working relationship. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the past 4 months, the emergency room at Soldiers Memorial Hospital has been closed 16 times. For the people of Annapolis County and Western Kings, closures become more problematic when the emergency room was closed in Middleton and the emergency room was closed in Digby as well, Mr. Speaker, leaving the Valley Regional and the Yarmouth Regional with some 225 kilometers between them, the only emergency room departments open in the Valley. These closures have been frustrating and puzzling to residents given government's flurry of pre-legislature sitting announcements around the centralized database that would ensure a supply of physicians to cover emergency room closures. So my question to the minister, could the Minister of Health and Wellness indicate how many doctors have expressed an interest in covering ER shifts by adding their names to the central database?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Official Opposition for this question. I had the pleasure earlier to introduce and table the Emergency Department Accountability Report, Mr. Speaker. And in my speech that I talked about earlier, we recognize that there are areas in the province that we are finding difficulty in continuing to reduce the closure rates of emergency departments. We have a suite of options that we are working with our partners across district health authorities, including physicians who are willing to put their name on to a pool of physicians that are willing to work around the province. And we're working extremely hard to cover shifts, especially in the leaders' riding, Mr. Speaker. We know there's an issue there, and we're going to continue to work to minimize the number of closures of the emergency department in that region in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, comments are spreading throughout the community as to why the emergency room at Soldiers Memorial Hospital has been closing more and more frequently, despite the centralized database and the additional physicians coming to our communities. Media reports have noted that with only 7 emergency room physicians working at Valley Regional, the differential in wages between the two hospitals could draw more doctors to fill shifts at Valley than at Soldiers Memorial Hospital, Mr. Speaker. While we all know that the Valley Regional needs to function, so do the hospitals that keep people from going to the regional centres, Mr. Speaker, in the first place. So could the minister indicate who sets the hourly rate for physicians at Soldiers Memorial Hospital? Is it the department or is it the district?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No question, salaries and rates for physicians to cover shifts across the province is extremely important and extremely complicated. But no question, we work with and negotiate with Doctors Nova Scotia, who negotiate a fee depending on what locate or what facility you work in across the province, Mr. Speaker, and we'll continue, I think, in that manner, because I think it best serves the physicians that Doctors Nova Scotia represent, but also recognizing there is a difference of level of care from hospital to hospital, and a difference in the amount of skills and education background that you need to work in certain hospitals around the province, Mr. Speaker. So that's negotiated between the province and Doctors Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the minister that's a district as a result of the changes to the Physician Master Agreement made by the previous Conservative government 4 years ago. Mr. Speaker, when the DHAs are faced with these budget cuts, the easy solution is to keep emergency rooms like Soldiers closed, Mr. Speaker. This government is a long ways away from keeping its promise to keep emergency rooms open, Mr. Speaker. In fact, things have worsened at Soldiers Memorial Hospital, Mr. Speaker, since the NDP have gone to power. So my question to the minister, could the minister outline what he is going to do next to keep the ER open at Soldiers Memorial Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And no question, I recognize the challenge and the anguish that not only the people who are providing services and trying to fill those difficult shifts to fill in that area of the province, Mr. Speaker, but the anguish placed on the residents. Nobody wants to hear that their local emergency department is closing for a long weekend or even for one night, Mr. Speaker. That's why we asked Dr. John Ross to go around the province to figure out what we could do as a government to address the emergency room closures, Mr. Speaker. That's why he brought forward a plan, and the plan is Better Care Sooner, where we have a multitude of items that we are working towards to ensure that we minimize the closure rates across the province. One is the collaborative emergency centres, Mr. Speaker. We see that they're working extremely well, like in Parisboro and Spring Hill, where we've seen a 93 to 97% decrease in the closure rates in those communities. I know that it doesn't answer and address the issues in that particular hospital, but we're going to continue to work with partners to provide physicians to hard-to-fill areas, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to work with the District Health Authority to minimize the number of shifts and closures that we see here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The economy in southwest Nova Scotia is falling into a recession since this lot of NDP became government over 3 years ago. Since that fateful day back in 2009, we've seen the loss of 6,600 jobs due to the mishandling of the economy. With the loss of the Yarmouth Ferry, that's just to name a few, and I'll table the Stats Canada number that shows that 6,600 jobs have now left the Southwest Nova Scotia area. Mr. Speaker, the fishery is the only industry that we have left. And close to 1,000 vessels are out on the ocean catching lobster this very minute. But we hear that the landed price is looking like a little more than $3 a pound. So my question to the Minister of Fisheries, what is this department doing to make sure that fishers in Southwest Nova Scotia will have a decent price this lobster season?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To the member opposite, again, I want to thank the member opposite for the timely question. In fact, we're doing a considerable amount as this government. Unfortunately, the other government, when the member opposite was the minister, they did not do this. We actually have financed the Lobster Council of Canada along with our neighbouring provinces, and we are taking a proactive approach. Just recently, in the last 3 weeks, Mr. Speaker, I said yesterday that we had a special meeting with our counterparts across the maritime provinces dealing with this particular issue. And I can recite you a number of examples like putting more protection around Georges Bank, which this government done. We're standing up for owner-operator. We were the first elected official government to take that official stance. We stand up for the inshore fisheries, and when it comes to the lobster industry, and I'm sure the member opposite will be standing up for the lobster fishers. Thank you for the question.
The Honourable Member for Argyle.
Mr. Speaker, the unemployment rate in the Southwest Shore area is 13.5%. That's the highest rate since Statistics Canada started tracking them back in 1987. Today, hundreds of people are heading west as they have absolutely no confidence in the fishery in our area. And I'll table that document as well. The minister's words will give cold comfort to the thousands of families who depend on the fishery for putting food on their table. We have deeply divided industry that is looking at poor pricing once again this year. Will the minister maybe just stray off his speaking notes and commit to rolling up his sleeves and working with the industry? And that includes, Mr. Speaker, the LFAs, even 1688, the buyers, and other organizations in order to find real opportunities to improve the price.
Honourable the Minister of Fisheries.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to reflect and give the member opposite a little bit of history lesson here. First of all, I was the chairperson of the 34 Advisory Committee for 3 terms. I know this industry inside out, and I can tell you that we have been forcefully bringing this issue in a very proactive approach to the industry and regarding this situation. The Lobster Council of Canada is addressing the issues about grading and getting more of a international support for this particular market, and we are there for the lobster industry. Unlike the member opposite, when this issue surfaced a number of years ago, when the Harper government had an opportunity to deal with this issue, the federal government has never took this issue seriously, and they have never pointed money in the right direction. We have stood up for the inshore fishery, and will continue to stand up for the inshore fishery. Thank you very much for the question.
The Honourable Member for Argyle on his final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the minister knows that the things that he's speaking about are wrong and ineffective. He knows full well that our government had put in a number of dollars in making sure that our product was being marketed around the world, something that they have not done. While he stood silent, while that minister stood silent, while his government was gutting the economy of Southwest Nova Scotia, I guess he'll just remain ineffective once again when it comes to helping his colleagues in the fishery. Will the minister commit today to actually helping those who have been knocking on his door, calling him every day, that they've been calling on him for the last 3 years? Is he going to actually help them?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
very much, Mr. Speaker. And my memory is very clear, and I hope I want to jog the member opposite's memory, because I believe it was the former third party that wanted to charge the fishermen a $40 permit to sell lobsters roadside. We took that permit fee away. I also want to point out that we worked very hard on this issue. We're very proactive, and we've met with the ministers across the Maritimes in the last 3 weeks, and the Lobster Council is doing marketing, international and national marketing on this issue. And it just reminds me that we've done a lot. And I talked about the protection about George's Bank and standing up for owner-operator and EI. And it reminds me that this issue came about 20 years ago, Mr. Speaker, but it reminds me of a song, and I hope everybody gets the lyric to this, because the lyrics of Otis Redding wrote a song that reminds me of the opposition on this issue 20 years ago. They were sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time, watching the tide roll away. Mr. Speaker, they had the opportunity, they wasted time. Thank you for the question.
I know what he's going to do. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's a hard act to follow. Mr. Speaker, my question's for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. I had some help, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with two collisions early last week, and very unfortunate that last week, crosswalk safety and awareness is again at the forefront of people's mind. It's unfortunate that actions have to happen in order for this important issue to be raised. So my first question to the Minister is, what efforts is government taking to increase awareness for crosswalk safety in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my friend opposite for that question. Indeed, I acknowledge and want to express sympathy for those people who recently had accidents in our crosswalks. It's a tragedy when this kind of thing happens, and unfortunately it's been happening much too often of late. In terms of crosswalks, Mr. Speaker, every intersection in Nova Scotia is a crosswalk. Some of them are marked they're stenciled with white lines. Indeed, when we look at where these white lines go, an assessment is made to determine the pedestrian crossing at that particular point and the flow of traffic in that particular area. That's one of the things we do. We mark crosswalks that are more needed to be noticed. And there are gradations of how that's done. Some of them have, in addition to the markings, they have signage up. Some of them have lights up. Recently, on some of them, we've pooled with municipalities to increase lighting on some of these more used crosswalks. But really, crosswalk safety is everybody's responsibility. We all have to be careful, particularly drivers. Drivers have to know that crosswalks are the ones that are marked in particular are the ones that we've flagged as being ones that they have to be more cautious in. Similarly, of course, we have to make sure that pedestrians are fully aware of the crosswalks, and we're doing the best we can on that front. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clare on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, there has been 4 deaths in HRM this year as a result of accidents in crosswalk this year. That's 2 more than last year. So awareness and safe practices are something that's obviously requires more government assistance in order to avoid these unfortunate and avoidable incidents. So my question again to the Minister, is government prepared to make further commitments in order to create more awareness about crosswalk safety in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have, in 2010, there was a a program in place to do that very thing, to advertise about crosswalks and the safety there. That's one of the things that we're looking at, increasing that kind of awareness, another program of that nature. As my friend also will know, we've recently introduced lowering speed zones in school areas where children are present, so that there's a safety factor added to that as well. So yes, these are things that we need to be constantly vigilant about, and we are, when we can, making these changes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Clare on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this issue affects all of us. It is a public safety issue and one that is important to both pedestrians and motorists. While often pedestrians are not in the wrong, they have the most to lose. And it's government's responsibility to ensure that those walking and those driving are aware of crossings and how to avoid accidents. So again, to the Minister, my final question is, what new initiatives is government examining to make certain the best possible awareness campaign around crosswalk safety is available to everyone?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. And I agree with my friend opposite that this is a very important public safety issue. Education is important. We have, as my friend will know, around the increase, or the decrease, I should say, in the speed zones in school areas. In June and September, we had an extensive advertising on radio, television, newspaper to bring that kind of issue forward. This is a matter that we look at on a regular basis. We're in touch with municipalities. When they ask us to look at an area in terms of putting in a crosswalk, that's something that we do on a regular basis. So in terms on a go-forward basis, as I said, this is a constant matter that's being looked at and reviewed, and we will continue to do that as we see opportunities to improve. We'll make those opportunities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC have all added a simple blood test for cystic fibrosis as part of their newborn screening program. Without newborn screening, babies are not diagnosed until symptoms begin to appear, at which point irreversible damage to the lungs and digestive system have already occurred. This damage adds cost to our healthcare system, but more importantly, leads to poorer health outcomes for individuals living with CF. I understand that the Reproductive Care Program, in partnership with the IWK, are working on a proposal to be delivered to the Department of Health in the new year. So in the meantime, could the Minister please indicate whether he views the addition of CF testing as part of newborn screening program as very important?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And cystic fibrosis, no question, is something that's extremely important to try to diagnose at an early age. We recognize there's been a push across the country to bring forward early testing for cystic fibrosis. We are compiling that information as we speak. We have a committee of professionals who will oversee any future additions to the screening program that we have currently here in Nova Scotia, and I look forward to receiving that information and moving forward on a possible recommendation if that's what comes out of the gathering of the information.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I noticed with interest that Cystic Fibrosis Canada wrote all of the Atlantic Ministers of Health on June 1st, 2012. I also note that CF Canada has posted online responses from 3 ministers, with the missing response being from the Minister of Health from Nova Scotia. Well, I understand that New Brunswick and PEI use the testing services of the IWK, so a response from them is relatively straightforward. I note that the New Brunswick Health Minister stated that a proposal was expected to be provided by the department in the summer. Given that the IWK is indicating that a proposal will be forthcoming in the new year, I'm wondering if the Minister could explain why there appears to be a delay in the delivery of the proposal.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier in my first response, I recognize that this is a new service that individuals in Cystic Fibrosis Canada want jurisdictions across Canada to implement in their screening programs. That's why we are doing, I think, the proper steps to ensure that we recognize that these tests could be or possibly be implemented here in Nova Scotia. So I will wait until I get those reports from the experts within our healthcare field here in Nova Scotia, and I look forward to speaking on this issue in the early new year.
The honourable member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know I don't have to tell the Minister of Health just how important newborn screening is for not only the health and well-being of children, but also for the healthcare system in general. This is not a new test. The minister needs only to speak to his counterparts in Ontario, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, or BC to learn more about the benefits. So I was wondering if the minister could give us an indication as to how long Cystic Fibrosis Canada can expect to wait for a response once the report being produced by the IWK and the Reproductive Care Program is received.
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier, we are looking at opportunities within our system here in Nova Scotia, the screening program that we have, that if we need to increase the number of screening programs or screening tests that are provided newborns here in Nova Scotia, we're going to do that. I realize cystic fibrosis is something that we need to ensure that we diagnose early, so that we could treat people earlier, Mr. Speaker. No question, they have a longer life expectancy if they recognize or are diagnosed at an early age. It is a serious disease, Mr. Speaker. So we will work early on in the new year to ensure that I have all the information in front of me, and that we'll move forward as soon as we can and make any decision as quickly as we can.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on a new question.
Mr. Speaker, according to the Better Care Sooner plan released almost 2 years ago, there was a recommendation to increase the public's use of 811. Page 22 of the plan states that by increasing the usage of 811, this will relieve pressure on emergency rooms, get people quickly to the hospital, best equipped to meet their needs, help people stay at home with their families when they really don't need emergency care, and I will table this, Mr. Speaker. Given we have spent at a minimum $250,000 last year, with more being spent this year encouraging people to use 811 so they could have access to a registered nurse 24/7, could the minister please confirm that when someone calls 811, they promptly speak to a registered nurse?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud as a government to continue on supporting the 811 service. I believe that Nova Scotians are well served by having access to the highly trained professionals as the nurses who are overseeing that service, Mr. Speaker. And as Nova Scotians utilize the 811 service, they do usually almost immediately have contact with someone on the other end. No question, because of call volumes, there are times when they have to leave their name and their number, and that registered nurse returns a phone call to an individual. And we've noticed a trend as we advocate or as we promote the 811 system, we see an increase in the use of that service. So I believe 811 is a complement to the Better Care Sooner plan, Mr. Speaker. It allows Nova Scotians to ask some of those questions sometimes that in the past they would just arrive at an emergency department. And I think the use of this by Nova Scotians is an important component to the healthcare system.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Gary Burley recently called 811, and when he did, a gentleman indicated the nurse is busy. After being left on hold for 2 or 3 minutes, he hung up to tend to his ailing wife, then called again. This time, a lady answered and he got the same response: the nurse is busy. He never did get a chance to speak to the nurse that evening. The next day, he spoke to the manager, clinical support services at McKesson, and was told that there were 2 or 3 nurses on duty, so they were probably busy, but she would double-check the numbers and get back to him. When the manager at McKesson did not get back to Mr. Burley, he called the manager again and was told that he would have to talk to the Department of Health and Wellness to find out how many nurses were working at 811 that evening. Given the initial information provided to Mr. Burley, does the minister believe that 2 or 3 nurses manning the 811 system for the province is sufficient?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's unfortunate to hear this type of case. That's not the service that we expect to be provided to Nova Scotians, but I'm unaware of this circumstance. But I can guarantee Nova Scotians that the 811 system is well run. With the nurses that we have working that service for Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. As I said, you may not every time speak to a nurse immediately. They do have people who will receive those calls when the nurses are busy to try to, similar to if you were into an emergency department, assess the acuity level of the question, and they will get people to return those calls. So I hope that Nova Scotians recognize that it is a service that at times is very busy, and I know that they're working extremely hard to return every single call that is made to 811. But I do encourage Nova Scotians that if it's a serious issue, they need to call 911. Don't wait for anybody to call you back. Get the ambulance on the way. Get the highly trained paramedics on the way to provide service to you.
The Honourable Member for Kings West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, according to a press release issued in March 2009, 15 full-time and 12 part-time nurses were to be hired, with a contact centre located in Dartmouth and some nurses working throughout the province out of their own home. This is a far cry from the 2 or 3 nurses Mr. Burley was told were working. 811 has been established to keep people from going to emergency rooms or from calling 911 when there is no medical emergency. Given that Mr. Burley has never received a clear answer from anyone, could the minister please tell us, or could he table before the end of the business day, how many nurses work at 811 on any given 24-hour period for, say, the last month?
The Honourable Minister of Health and Wellness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I said earlier, it's unfortunate that someone has a bad experience when they try to access services, especially healthcare services, Mr. Speaker. As I am unaware of this particular case, I welcome the member opposite to give me any information that he has, and I can rest assured that I will look into that and have my staff look into why someone was given certain information. But I want Nova Scotians to know that we have highly trained nurses who are working the 811 service, but I encourage them, if there's any doubt that they think that there's a serious issue going on medically, that they should call 911, Mr. Speaker. That, I think, can ensure that they get access to the emergency care when and where they need it.
The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. As of the 22nd of May this year, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal changed the way services are being delivered to Nova Scotia taxpayers. In Hants West, for example, I now have my local Department of Transportation out of their Brooklyn base, something that has always been in place and works well. But now I also have the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal out of Chester, covering another section of Hants West. Unfortunately, as a result, there is a noticeable difference in how services are being provided. My question to the Minister, why is this policy changed when it works so well for many, many years?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. My understanding is that when these arrangements were changed, or the areas of service were changed, it was to accommodate a more evening of the workload for people in areas, so that it was a fairer distribution of the workload. It also had to do with a better distribution of equipment that we had available in different areas. At one point, we might have had a piece of equipment covering, and I'm just going to as an example, give a distance, but perhaps 10 kilometers, whereas in in a neighboring area, the same kind of work, the person was assigned 30 kilometers. So these realignments, as I understand it, were to balance out that workload so that they both would have approximately 20 kilometers of work, roadway to cover. So that's my understanding of the situation. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hants West on his first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The department stipulates that changes are happening as a result of a new collective bargaining agreement between CUPE and the province. Part of the new agreement allegedly includes reducing the geographic size of work areas in some parts of the province. However, the hard-working individuals looking after the delivery of service consider the province's definition of a change as a smokescreen, because all of this is done is to make their specific coverage areas larger, therefore making it more difficult to get the necessary work done. The area in the constituency of Hants West, which has been taken over by the Chester, has literally been forgotten. No work is getting done at all, and I can guarantee you one thing, it's not for lack of trying, because I've spoke with the minister's people out there, the area manager and the operational supervisors on multiple occasions, Mr. Speaker. My question, will the minister commit to reviewing this decision so he can see for himself it is just not working?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that question. I thank the member for that question. I'm sorry that if the member was having some difficulty with a portion of my department, with people in his local area, that he didn't bring that to my attention. I certainly would have looked at it and to determine what the problem was and to come up with a reasonable solution for him. I don't know in particular what kind of work he's saying has gone wanting as a result of these changes. Again, my understanding is that, in effect, these changes have actually improved service because it's a more evening out of the workload for the people, for the workers, so that they can actually have a fairer share of the workload. And similarly, equipment has been placed in areas that, again, makes its usage more effective. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hants West on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the real reason for this change is due to the government cutting funds that are sorely needed to take care of rim work around the rural Nova Scotia, and we all know that. Any rural member would know that. And I know I don't have to explain to rural members in this House how important RIM funding is for getting work done, like getting potholes fixed, ditching done, guardrails put in place that are desperately needed. Since this change in May, the area of Vaughan's and Leominster and Hants West are being neglected. In fact, so neglected, the supervisor at the school bus garage has changed bus routes due to concerns expressed by area residents for the coming winter season. My question to the minister: does the minister understand how this has impacted those living in areas like Vaughan's and Leominster, where road work is being ignored?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure, Renewal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to answer that question. I note the time, but I want to get that question answered. I'm also from a rural area. I appreciate very much how important rim work is to our areas.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers. I will now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill 103, Accountability and Economic Development Assistance Act, for second reading.
Bill number 103. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise on this bill, but I'm going to be quite brief. And the reason I'm going to be quite brief is there's only 6 minutes available to us for debate on this bill here this evening. Mr. Speaker, as you know, the opposition only gets to control one day of the week in this legislature, which is on Wednesdays. It's either the official opposition or the Progressive Conservative Caucus. And today, where the hours are 2 to 6, you will have noted, and it's an old trick, Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to say this government's the first to do it, but when we see the last few weeks where a government has called hours that has never been able to have enough business to fill those hours, and yet turns around and on the one day that's available to the opposition to bring forward business on behalf of Nova Scotians, they fill up as much of the time as they can with ministerial statements, government notices of motion, and notices of motion. Mr. Speaker, opposition day is the one day we hear from backbenchers that we didn't even know existed. because not a word is heard from them all week, but Wednesday is the one day we're guaranteed we're going to hear from them. And you know, Mr. Speaker, it's extremely unfortunate because I've risen on a number of times as the House Leader for the official opposition to point out that on the order paper there are dozens and dozens of opposition bills that have not been called for debate, and yet the government wraps up its day after 2 hours work, 3 hours work, when there's 2.5, 3 hours left in the day, and yet no business is called. And on the one day that we have control over business, the government decides to fill that up and take away the time for the opposition to be able to raise those issues. So, Mr. Speaker, I find that extremely unfortunate. This is an important bill, one that clearly one would expect that the government would want to debate and would want to see passed in this House. But in light of the government's efforts today to eat up time to prevent the opposition from having a further opportunity to speak, I would believe, Mr. Speaker, that my time actually to speak today, which was limited to 2 minutes, has expired.
The honourable member for Hammonds Plains Upper Sackville.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can tell the honourable member from Richmond that this backbencher is standing on his feet as much as I possibly can, Mr. Speaker. And in this session, I know, Mr. Speaker, that I've been talking about the issues that really matter to Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker. And I can tell everyone that's watching at home, Mr. Speaker, and I want to tell the people at home as well, that the opposition also has the ability to have the debate on bills and that they have brought forward, in which they have. And so they're the ones that limited the 2-minute debate on this bill, Mr. Speaker. 2-minute debate, Madam Speaker. And that so that's what I want the people at home to know, Mr. Speaker. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, is that I know, and we're talking about economic development here, Madam Speaker, that I know that Nova Scotians want high-quality, good-paying jobs for them and their families, Mr. Speaker. The Liberal Party and the Conservative Party sat in their seats the other day and laughed, Madam Speaker. They laughed at the fact that there were 1,000 jobs for Nova Scotians being created in this province. They do not get it, Madam Speaker. They do not get it. They do not understand the fact that this government, that we're building a future to allow young Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker, to stay in our province. That party never did it, Madam Speaker, and I'm proud to be standing on this side of the House. Thank you very much.
Recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's great to be able to stand to actually talk about the bill for a minute, if we could. Madam Speaker, the fact that a government has to bribe companies to come to our province is a sign that our economy is sick. Madam Speaker, this bill doesn't cure that sickness either. It simply slaps a decorative bandage on it, maybe a Spider-Man or Cinderella. This bill guarantees the creation of one single job, Madam Speaker, the guy who builds the website. Does nothing to lower taxes, stop wasteful spending, or create long-term, meaningful jobs. It does nothing to fix the fundamentals of our economy.
Order.
Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Pictou East.
Point of order, Madam Speaker. The terminology bribe in this House is just not acceptable. It's not parliamentary.
Thank you.
Not parliamentary.
Recognize the honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
I will withdraw that word, Madam Speaker. Now, where was I? This bill, Madam Speaker, won't create a climate that brings companies and job creators to Nova Scotia. A party is needed that's serious about fixing Nova Scotia's economy and that introduce a bill that would make balanced budgets the law. Needs a party that'll lower taxes, stop wasteful spending, and create jobs, Madam Speaker. That's the Progressive Conservative Party. It's time to rip off the Cinderella badge and get on with it, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Pictou East.
Madam Speaker, I defer to the...
Order, please. The time allotted for that resolution has elapsed. I recognize the honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Madam Speaker. We are certainly looking forward to a vote there. Unfortunately, maybe another time we'll have the opportunity. Would you please now call Resolution 2275 for debate?
Now call resolution number 2275. I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Madam Speaker.
Oh, order, please. Forgive me, I saw member for Cape Breton North rise, so I recognized him. Yeah, thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It of course is always important for me to get up and speak about this resolution, this issue, which has been absolutely critical to my area of the province over the course of the last 3 years, and which I think will continue to have an impact on the economy of Yarmouth and Southwest Nova, and that, of course, is the Yarmouth Ferry. The decision, the rash decision to cut subsidy to the Yarmouth Ferry in 2009 was reckless, and we've been dealing with the negative repercussions of that ever since, which are pretty significant. This was a decision that was solely made by this new Democratic government, by the Premier and perhaps his cabinet colleagues, but it was a decision that was supported by that entire caucus. The reason there is not a ferry in Yarmouth today is because of our Premier and the NDP government in this province, Madam Speaker. There's nobody else to blame. That solely rests on the shoulders of the folks that I'm looking at opposite. I do want to address some of the comments that were made the other night by the member for Lunenburg West. Losing the ferry just didn't impact Yarmouth. It impacted a lot of regions of the province and the tourism sector, Madam Speaker. It did impact Shelburne, Queens County, Lunenburg as well. It impacted some traffic on the valley. And we had meetings in Cape Breton with tourism operators all the way in Bedeque, and they said it had major impacts there as well. This was a decision that just didn't impact one town or one region, and it really impacted the whole province. I did take exception to the member from Lunenburg West comments about his belief that the government was in this all alone, didn't have any potential options or partners. That isn't true. The municipality, and I will table this, in a submission that the municipality made to the province in 2009, the municipality actually outlined four funding options other than the one that was being requested at the time. And actually, the municipality, in working with the federal government, came up with half the money that was required to keep the CAT going for an extra year, which would allow the community to transition, and which would give the province and the community time to find a new service that would require potentially less subsidy or whatever the Premier was looking for. So to suggest that there were no partners in 2009 to keep this ferry going is completely inaccurate. In fact, because of the partnership of the municipalities in the Yarmouth area, which would include Argyll, the town of Yarmouth, and the municipality of Yarmouth, it would have only required this government $3 million to keep that ferry service going for another year. It is true, and I'll go over the numbers if the Minister of Education would like to hear them. $12 million it would have costed to subsidize that ferry service. It's going to cost the provincial government $6 million either way to keep it going or cancel. So by canceling the ferry contract with Bay Ferries, this province actually had to give Bay Ferries $6 million to pay out the contract. So that leaves us with $6 million left. So out of a $12 million subsidy that was needed for 1 year, $6 million was spent to cancel the service. The municipalities came up with half of the remaining subsidy, which was $3 million, which would have left $3 million, undeniably, that's the fact. That's how much it would have cost to keep that ferry service going for 1 more year. And what happened was, Madam Speaker, this government, this Premier said no. We said no to all the options that were presented by the municipality. We said no to the option for the municipality to cover half of that subsidy. And instead of investing an additional $3 million to keep that ferry service going for a year, to allow the community to transition, help us find a new service while we're keeping that market in New England intact, This Premier and this government said no. And everybody in the province has been wondering to this date why that was the case. And I know we have felt the negative economic impacts most distinctly in Yarmouth. It's estimated between 325 to 625 jobs were immediately lost. We've had several accommodations facilities closed, including the Colony Harbour Inn, which was our second largest hotel in the area, right on the waterfront. And we've lost about 50% of our room accommodations. They've all closed. We've had a lot of restaurants close, including some historic facilities like Captain Kelly's, Bruno's, the Austrian Inn. We're now losing the Colony restaurant as well. I mean, the negative impact of this decision has not stopped in Yarmouth ever since this Premier chose to make it. And if you look at what's happened in other parts of the province, you've had similar impacts as well. In fact, if you look at travel to the U.S., and this is interesting because I know the Minister of Economic, Rural Development and Tourism spoke at a TIANS conference this week. And he talked about how great the tourism industry was doing, except, he said, regrettably, that U.S. visitation to this province was down. We all know why that's happened. We eliminated the one major link we had left via sea to the largest tourism market in the world. And, you know, the Minister of Community Services, any other minister over there can keep defending this decision. But the fact that the Premier has actually reversed his opinion on this would be a clear indication of that cabinet that there was a mistake made. And instead of now paying $3 million, one-time $3 million to keep that ferry service going for a year, what does this Premier promise and committed to? $3 million a year over 7 years. There's a reason for that. It's because 3 years later, going into an election year, this government and this Premier are tired of hearing about the negative impacts that this decision has made. It's not a coincidence that heading into election year, this decision was made. In fact, the tourism industry, people in Yarmouth, and businesses across the province have been demanding this sort of action for the last 3 years, and this government said no and ignored those pleas up until this past summer. So in Yarmouth, we saw probably around 500 jobs directly lost, and U.S. visitations down, and that ranges from across the province. You look, and I'll table these, Madam Speaker. 2009, U.S. visitations dropped. That's the first year that we lost the service. The same thing happened in 2010. U.S. visitation dropped again. 2011. These are all, and these are all based on the year before. So the decision was made in 2009. It wasn't made in 2004. 2011, another season where U.S. visitation to this province is down. And now we look, 2012, and the Minister of Community Services, if she's interested in the facts, she can read the data that I'm tabling. These are facts. This is the facts from your own Department of Tourism. 2012, visitation from the U.S. to this province down again.
I would ask the member not to use the document as a prop, holding it up. It's for tabling. Thank you. The honourable member for Yarmouth.
That is 3 years in a row. 4 years in a row that we've had U.S. visitation to this province down, something that the Minister of Tourism just acknowledged this week at the TIANS concert. That has also impacted other tourism indicators in the province as well, Madam Speaker, and I'll table these, especially for the Minister of Community Services to take a look at if she's interested. These are statistics from the Tourism Department. 2009, this isn't just U.S. visitation, this is all visitation. South Shore, down 8%. Fundy and Annapolis down, Yarmouth and Acadian Shores down, and province-wide. Tourism numbers are down. I'll table that. 2010, South Shore down, Yarmouth and Acadian Shores down. It's another one. 2011, South Shore down, Yarmouth and Acadian Shores down, an additional 10%. The province down. These are tourism indicators. Anyone can take a look at these over there. 2012, that's this year. South Shore visitation is down, province-wide. Tourism is down again. One cannot say that tourism isn't down because you eliminated the major connector that we had going to the largest tourism market in the world. In the bad years during the recession, Madam Chair, there was still 80,000 to 100,000 people coming over here and spending money. And despite all this stuff, despite the fact that this government probably knew that these numbers were going to be impacted by losing the ferry, they made that decision anyway. And let's look at what happened over the course of those 3 years. We had a number of reports done, independent reports done by government agencies and by consulting firms. ACOA, this would have been released in 2010. Transportation study. By the way, you know, the province wasn't willing to wait till the study came up before they made the decision to cut the ferry. If they had, they would have gotten this report that said the present value of benefits from continued operations of the Yarmouth Main Ferry Service are estimated to be $70.4 million, consisting primarily of travel time impacts, $22.2 million in benefits to Nova Scotian tourism in the amount of $35.1 million. Transportation study done by ACOA. We have a another study, impact study, done by the Chambers of Commerce from Shelburne, Yarmouth. They consulted a private consulting firm to do that. This was released in June 2010. Conclusions, and an annual investment of $6 million generates approximately, generates over $22 million of revenue to residents of Nova Scotia. The results of this paper have shown that the Yarmouth Main Ferry Service performs with strong financial indicators. That's June 2010. 2 reports that highlighted the fact, what we all know. We have a third report done by the Nova Scotia International Ferry Partnership, again given to an independent consulting firm, that found, in terms of economic impact, Gardner Pinfold reported that the termination of the service had a dramatic impact on the hospitality sector, not only in southwestern Nova Scotia of the province, but throughout the whole province. And they conclude that restoration of the service would reverse the negative economic impact the region has suffered over the course of the last 3 years. Positive impact will be felt throughout the region as soon as the service begins, that the revived Yarmouth U.S. ferry service will generate $16.3 million in tourism spending, that the impact of the ferry service extends beyond Yarmouth to the whole province, that the service contributes to provincial and municipal tax revenues, that the 2010 drop in U.S. tourism can be directly linked to the loss of the ferry service. That is a third report done by an independent consultant. What was this government's response to those 3 reports, including one that they were a part of? They ignored them. And they still get up in this House and say that cutting the Yarmouth ferry was the right thing to do. It's absurdity to say that, Madam Speaker. It doesn't make any sense. So fast forward to this past year, an election year, we have another report done. This time it's commissioned by the Premier. Its findings mirror the findings of the past 3 reports and tell everybody the same thing that tourism sector has been telling this province for the last 3 years. A ferry service is viable and it's needed to reverse the negative impact to our economy. And I'll table this as well. So now, after this report's released, what does the Premier say? Oh, well, now that we have this report, it changes everything. And now we're going to invest $21 million into a ferry service. That report has no new information in it, and tells the Premier everything that we knew before. So what we have had here is 3 years of negative impacts to this provincial economy because of this decision, and finally in election year, the Premier trying to make things right with this. So, and he couldn't even do that right. You know, all that was needed this whole time was for the Premier to say, we made a mistake, we want to fix it. That still hasn't happened. Instead, he still tries to spin this and say that everything's different now. Now we'll put $21 million into a ferry service when we only needed $3 million 3 years ago. This is a black spot on this government's record and was one of the first major mistakes that it has made. But as we've seen, Madam Speaker, it definitely wasn't the last. And what we're hoping now in Yarmouth, and I know the tourism sector is, I was privileged enough to speak to some tourism operators from across the province and even beyond this week. We hope that the Premier does hold his commitment to restore that ferry service before the next election is called. We need him to work with the federal government and right this wrong that was done to the entire province. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I welcome the opportunity to rise and speak on Resolution 2275, even though I must say I can't agree with its premise, nor the kind of thinking that may have generated it in the first place. And I guess the person who submitted it, or the member who submitted it, was a member from Kings West. He's a teacher, so I guess he probably understands the value of repetition when you're trying to teach somebody something. So I'm going to repeat some things I said the other day. I spoke in the House yesterday at some length, as you may recall, regarding the misconceptions that were perpetuated by the opposition parties regarding the suspension of the Yarmouth Ferry. Instead of going into a lengthy regurgitation of those comments, I'll try to encapsulate, maybe in point form, what I said in this regard just yesterday. There is no question, and I said this yesterday, and I'll say it again today, there is no question in my mind that people and businesses in southwestern Nova Scotia want to see, as the member from Yarmouth just said, a viable, successful, and stable ferry between Yarmouth and the United States. And I indicated that this area of the province is one of certainly my favorite summer destinations, and many of my colleagues, like the member from Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley over there, have family that live in Yarmouth. And so it goes without saying that we get it. We definitely get it. Now, Madam Speaker, in 2009, when we were elected as the government of our province, the ridership on the CAT was down by, are you ready for this, 73% from its peak in 2002. Down 73% from its peak in 2002. And that old model had already failed, Madam Speaker. Nova Scotians were paying more and more to run an increasingly empty ferry. An increasingly empty ferry. I noted yesterday that neither the federal government, which canceled the subsidy during the Honourable Paul Martin's stint as Prime Minister, nor the government of Maine were willing to contribute to the cost of running the ferry. And all the other ferries in Atlantic Canada, I mentioned this the other day, I assume everybody agrees with this, all the other major ferries in Atlantic Canada, the Newfoundland ferries, the PEI ferries, the Digby-St. John ferry, have three funding partners. And to complicate matters, and this is where I really wonder sometimes about how much the opposition parties understand global pressures, there was, after 9/11, a requirement for U.S. citizens to buy passports which Homeland Security demanded that they have in order to get back into their own country. And given the kind of orientation people have in the United States toward tax, many Americans refused to buy them, which means they couldn't come to our country because they needed a passport to get back into their own. At the same time, gas prices skyrocketed. At the same time, the currencies of Canada and the United States reached parity. And everybody knows. Ask anybody in my region, and they'll tell you, when our American visitors do not have a currency that's higher than ours, and they don't get a rebate back when they buy something here, they tend to stay at home. And they did. Now, Madam Speaker, we couldn't run the ferry on our own hook. An increasingly empty ferry on our own hook. So we consulted with the community and we established a thorough, transparent consultative process by way of a draft request for proposals. And this process resulted in a number of potential bidders. And on November 20th, we held a session in Halifax for these potential bidders. To provide feedback on the draft RFP. And there were at that meeting the three potential bidders in attendance. And this session was only one way we engaged and consulted with potential bidders. Industry groups could email, they could call, or they could participate in conference calls. And as opposed to the knee-jerk reactions of governments in the past, where, you know, there's a problem, you get a bunch of money, you throw it at it and hope it goes away. What we tried to do was make sure that when we did it correctly. We did it right. We did it the right way. Minister Corbett has written, the Federal Minister of Transport, Infrastructure, Deputy Premier.
Thank you. I just want to remind members that not to use the proper name of the member. Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Madam Speaker, I stand corrected. The Deputy Premier has written the Federal Minister of Transport, Infrastructure, Communities, and Dennis Level and officials have started the necessary discussions, and this is part of our effort to gain federal support and, we hope, investment in the new model for a Yarmouth ferry service. Currently, our government has put, and I think the member for Yarmouth mentioned it, $21 million on the table for the next 7 years as our contribution to help make this happen. Now, Madam Speaker, it's the member from Kings West who brought forth this resolution in an attempt through some sort of, I don't know, eclectic and flawed reasoning, I guess, to try to tie the suspension of service of the Yarmouth Ferry to a lack of caring by our government for rural Nova Scotians. At least I think when I read it, that's what was attempted here. Where this comes from, Madam Speaker, I do not know, because you see, Madam Speaker, here's where his leader, the leader of the party, of the member for Kings West, is on rural economic issues. The leader of the Liberal Party spoke out against 400 good jobs on the South Shore, Digby, and at the feed mill in Truro when he criticized Cook Aquaculture's expansion. He spoke out against the previous the province's investment that ensured we would win the national shipbuilding contract. That investment over 30 years means 11,000 good jobs, some of them true in HRM, but many in other areas of the province as well. He has criticized DSTN, going so far as to say they shouldn't be allowed to compete for business in the province. Madam Speaker, due to what I can only think of as a lack of experience, the leader of the Liberal Party did not seem to understand how saving the former New Page Mill meant saving hundreds of small businesses throughout the Strait region and 1,400 jobs. Nor did he seem to understand that the province will gain the entire loan back and make $150 million in the new tax revenue over 12 years. Now, Madam Speaker, the Liberal leader initially supported Lower Churchill, or I believe so, but now he wants the province to turn its back on that project, a project that will create thousands of good jobs and stable power rates. And the leader of that party, to which the member who put forth this resolution belongs, has fallen into the trap of advocating Nova Scotia should deregulate energy in the province, which would, as we know from failed attempts in Alberta and Ontario, drive rates up 30 to 50% and kill thousands, Madam Speaker, thousands of jobs. So to summarize, the member from Kings West who proposed this resolution has a leader who in the past few months, just the past few months, has threatened to kill more than 10,000 jobs in places like Digby, Truro, Cape Breton, Pictou, Halifax, Dartmouth, Port Hawkesbury, and Shelburne, to name a few. And now he has the audacity to bring a resolution like that forth and imply that we don't care about rural Nova Scotia. Now, I just would ask Nova Scotians, is this the kind of leader and the kind of party that they want at the helm of our province over the next couple of years? And I think I know the answer to that. Madam Speaker, I would suggest that that's not what Nova Scotians want. On the other hand, Madam Speaker, our government has clearly shown its support for small and medium-sized business in all parts of this province, investing millions of dollars to help hundreds of Nova Scotia businesses become more productive, become more innovative, train their employees, and bolster their competitiveness in a world market. I emphasize world market because we live in the world and global forces have an impact on what happens here. Our government has made critical investments in more than 200 small businesses, companies like Allendale Electronics down in Lockport, Bill Did It in Sydney, and Eden Valley Poultry in the Annapolis Valley. It seems to me that the kind of support the opposition claims is missing here in Nova Scotia is exactly what we're doing. And so I'm not sure what they're on about, I really have to say. So I would consider the resolution that I'm actually speaking on, because it appeared and somebody should speak on it, I consider it, if anything, misleading and kind of an insulting resolution to put forth with regard to how we're looking at the rural economy of Nova Scotia. So I'd urge the member from Kings West who proposed it to look at the hundreds of examples of the government's position on supporting small business in Nova Scotia. No small businesses, of course, know who they are, and if they're listening, I'm sure they'll have something to say about this at some point. I would further encourage that member to recognize the government has decentralized a number of departments, relocating them in critical rural areas of our province. And of course, that is worthy of his attention, in my opinion. And the government has similarly done a number of other things. For instance, the small business income corporate tax rate. The opposition could have reduced this rate when they were in power. They did not do that. Madam Speaker, we have done that. These cuts to the corporate, small business corporate tax rate are the first of their kind in more than 20 years. And of course, 20 is like the magic number because that's how long our economy has been in doldrums thanks to the leadership of those two other parties. So by reducing the tax from 5 to 3.5%, this government is saving small business millions of dollars every year. Madam Speaker, growing the Nova Scotia economy means looking at the big picture. It means, first of all, looking at things globally. I keep saying that in here because I'm not sure folks get it. It means looking for opportunities of all sizes. And it means making choices that will bring long-term prosperity for Nova Scotian families across the province. Madam Speaker, that's exactly what the government is doing through our Jobs Here plan. Madam Speaker, we're turning the corner. People are learning the right skills for good jobs. Businesses are becoming more innovative and productive, and Nova Scotia is competing and winning on a global scale like never before. Madam Speaker, working together and investing in people sets the stage for a brighter future in Nova Scotia. And I would argue, Madam Speaker, in Nova Scotia, the future starts now. So what we're hoping, what I'm hoping, sincerely hoping, is that over the next number of days, however many days in here, we'll finally be able to convince those on the other side that no man is an island and no country is an island. We do not live outside of the world context. We live in a world where we are part of that world, and what happens in other places in the world, whether it's the United States, whether it's the European Economic Community, has something to say about how well we do here. It has something to say about that. And the member, I guess, from Yarmouth, he studied at university. Maybe he didn't take any economics courses. Maybe he did. I don't know. But I would argue that it would be a good idea perhaps to take a little primer, a little refresher, maybe go back, take another wind at it, and realize that all countries in the world do not operate in isolation, and industries in the world that have people who buy their products in various parts of the world. For instance, the United States buys a lot of our lumber. That's a given fact, Madam Speaker. Everybody knows that. If they have a downturn in their economy, if they have the Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae and the fiscal cliff, that's going to have some kind of bearing on how well we do in terms of selling our products there. So I would argue, housing starts are related to people buying wood. And when houses are not being built, people do not buy wood. That would be one rudimentary example for the folks over there to try to figure out in terms of understanding how the global economy works. So, Madam Speaker, it is my sincere hope that over the next while, as a result of having spoken on these issues, not just me, but the Premier and a number of other ministers in our government, that those on the other side will realize that we're part of a much bigger picture than the tiny little province of Nova Scotia, or I'd even argue the small population in a country like Canada. We're part of a much bigger picture, and it would be wise for every member in this House, including the ones that chirp at me occasionally over there when I'm speaking, to realize that's a very important factor as to how well we'll do now and in the future. Now, Madam Speaker, I've gone on longer than I really wanted to here. I realize my time is coming short, so with those few words, I shall take my place. Thank you.
Thank you. Recognize the honourable member for Argyle.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. It's my pleasure to stand and speak to this resolution. And I quite enjoy the partisanship sometimes in this House, and listening to the member, making sure that he stuck to his speaking notes. And I know there was some member for Lunenburg West in that. I know there was. There was also some lines that, of course, were presented to them from the caucus offices, from central government. But what he didn't really speak about all throughout that was really the truly Yarmouth issue, which is the cancellation of the ferry by that government. I know he tried to lecture us on a whole bunch of other issues about no country being an island. Well, I thought Britain was an island, Ireland's an island, Jamaica's an island, Australia, New Zealand, you know. So it's, you know, you know, it's. I get the metaphor, but there's so many great countries that that do it. And I'm not trying to attack the member. I'm really. I thanked him. I know he doesn't like to take the thank too well, but you know, the criticism I have is that he really didn't talk about the Yarmouth Ferry and what it's done to the economy of Southwest Nova Scotia. Now, it's not different than the question that I did ask the Minister of Fisheries earlier when I talked about the 6,600 jobs that have gone missing in Southwest Nova Scotia. And what is Southwest Nova Scotia? Southwest Nova Scotia is basically anywhere, if you draw a line between his home community of Bridgewater and cut it across to Kentville and count everything going west of that, that is southern Nova Scotia. Okay? That is the statistical area that Stats Canada looks at and looks at the jobs. And Madam Speaker, since 2009, and basically since they were started to record these in 1987, we have the highest unemployment rate that we've ever had. The highest unemployment rate. And why is that? Why is that? It's because we feel, and what we're hearing the people that we're talking to on a daily basis, and maybe they're clearly different people. Maybe they're out talking to different people than I'm speaking to. Maybe we're going to different coffee shops. Maybe we're going to different places. But the people that I talk to are not very optimistic about the economy in southern Nova Scotia. You know, I talked about, and I'll deviate a little bit before I go back to the ferry, but I talked about the fishery, and the problem that we're having today is that we have a price that is very low. And yes, a lot of that is impacted by the U.S. market, about the strength of our dollar, about a whole bunch of other issues that are sort of beyond our control. And, you know, to credit the Minister of Fisheries, I know there are a number of things within his department that are going on to try to make that price better, but there's so much more, I think, that we as government can do to make that better. But the optimism is at an all-time low. People are very pessimistic about how things are going to roll out. We have what we would call hired hands leaving this province in droves. I know a number of fishermen today who did not have the extra person on their boat to do the banning, because all of those people have moved out west to take on jobs that are well-paying, that are more stable in the oil patch. I can't blame them too much for it because of what we're seeing in that job losses of 6,600 people. Yeah, exactly. The member for Hants East says it, West says it well, is that people do have to eat, so they have to make these decisions. But the pessimism, the psyche of Southwest Nova Scotia right now is as low as I have ever seen it in my 43 years. You know, people don't believe we're ever going to get a boat back. I think they're hopeful. They would like to see it happen. But people don't believe that at this last minute before an election, when the government puts out an RFP, that we're actually going to be getting a boat. I hope they're wrong. I hope they're wrong, because I think we deserve to have a boat in Southwest Nova Scotia, as we had for over 100 years. So let's go to the decision. I mean, the decision to cancel the ferry. And I mean, okay, maybe it wasn't a decision directly to cancel the ferry. I'm sure that the cabinet didn't say, okay, how are we going to cancel that ferry? I'm sure there was a discussion amongst them and saying, well, listen, we're very concerned about this payment that's going out towards Bay Ferries in order to support the ferry. What are we going to do about it? Well, I think maybe in their inexperience that they felt that they could go and have a discussion with Bay Ferries and say, listen, we can't afford to pay that $6 million or that $9 million or that $3 million, whatever that number was. And we're not going to pay that to you anymore. Thinking that maybe Bay Ferries, you know, they're going to keep the boat there. You know, we're just supplementing it. We can't. That's the kind of negotiation I'm going to think that went on behind the scenes. I'm thinking the inexperience of the Premier and his fellows was that they thought they could negotiate this one, get them out of that payment, and that someone would go, and the boat would still continue to go forward. Well, we know what happened, is that Bay Ferries was a little smarter than them. And they said, no, listen, if we don't have that kind of payment, we can't provide that situation. What would have been better is that government would have presented a couple of options. Say, listen, and all of us would admit, everybody that you've talked to would say the ferry was the wrong kind of boat. The Cat ferry was not the ferry that we needed. So why didn't the government at the time say, listen, we're going to say for the next year, we're going to supplement this, but we need you to make a decision on getting a different service. We're going to want you to go out and get that done. I don't think that actually happened. I really don't think that happened, because I think knowing Bay Ferries, knowing the service that we had, that would have been reasonable to the area. And the area would have found an opportunity or an option to make that happen. But that didn't happen for us. So the decision was made. Bay Ferries called the bluff, and the ferry service was canceled in 2009. They didn't consult with anyone in Southwest Nova Scotia. They didn't call a mayor. They didn't talk to an MLA. They might have talked to somebody. I don't know who. People were caught extremely off guard by the decision of Bay Ferries to leave the area. You know, they could have picked up the phone. Yeah, no, the Minister of Fisheries could have picked up the phone and called around and said, hey, what do you think of this? I don't know if he did. I don't know if he did. Maybe he can show. But we know that from the work that the Chambers of Commerce have done, that the work that ACOA has done, and now finally what the government has done, is that an opportunity was lost in tax revenue. You know, whether it's the ACOA's guess of $35 million, whether it's the Chambers of Commerce decision or study of $22 million of revenue in Nova Scotia, and again, this is not a Southwest Nova Scotia. As much as we say it's a Yarmouth issue and a Southwest issue, there was businesses all across the province that have been impacted by the lack of ridership and the cancellation of the ferry. You know, and whether it's the job losses, I mean, we know the job losses have started to add up over the time, directly related to the ferry cancellation. Also to the changes to the tourist industry in Nova Scotia. You know, that can easily be counted in 300, 400, 500, 600 jobs directly because of that. You know, a lot of people would say, you know, this was a punishment. I don't believe it was a punishment to Southwest Nova Scotia for not voting for the government, but I think it was, again, a bit misguided, maybe a little bit of an inexperience that led to this decision. All right. So where are we today? Where are we with this situation today? That I'm hoping that this government will continue to support and move forward. They put out this RFP to bring together a lot of information that was already known. The Yarmouth Ferry Partnership had been working already for a good year and some, trying to find interested parties to set up a ferry service in Yarmouth to Maine. And I want to thank the members of that board, its co-chairs, for working really hard. Keith Condon, Neil LeBlanc, and all the other members of that board. You know, I think they've done a phenomenal job of trying to pull all those ideas together. So that wealth of information is sitting sitting in their heads, sitting in their files, ready to share with government. I'm thankful that the government itself has found it appropriate to work with them to find the right operator. The member for Lunenburg West said just a few days ago, or a week or so ago, they had a meeting in here in Halifax. There were a number of interested businesses, ferry operators that would get together to offer that service or be able to at least show interest in working towards something. You know, now that the government has put together $21 million in order to make that happen. Don't forget, it's $21 million over, I think it's 7 years, I think is what they looked at. An admission. I mean, really, it's an admission that maybe the first decision was done in haste, done too quickly, that maybe some things should have been researched a little better before we got here. What I found interesting with the information that was brought forward to us, the member from Yarmouth just tabled it there, the findings of the report, that when the discussion of ridership, and I know the member for Lunenburg West fell into this trap a little bit when we were talking about ridership. You know, the ridership of the CAT itself, yeah, it shows a decline in what was happening there, but there was, in the original decision, in the original way to try to defend that decision, people kind of forget about the Scotia Prince. And that Scotia Prince was bringing somewhere near 190,000 passengers a year. And in the year that they were canceled in 2009, if I remember correctly, it was probably still in the 150,000 range that boat was bringing before there was a disagreement between it and Bay Ferries on docking fees and a whole bunch of other issues that saw to the elimination or canceling of that service. So to go and blame 9/11, okay, yeah, we did lose some, but we kept forgetting to put the numbers of the Scotia Prince in there. And I think the experience of the Scotia Prince shows us that having an independent model, or having a model that is not requiring of a subsidy, is one that can work in Yarmouth for that ferry. And I'm going to call it the Nova Scotia ferry to Maine. That's not just the Yarmouth ferry. As much as we want to take ownership for it, you know, it is Nova Scotia's ferry. It is its connection to the States. So it can work. So what does it mean that we need to find the right model? There will be added support by both levels of government, maybe even 3 levels of government at this point. We know the $21 million is up front by the government. And, you know, okay, this doesn't happen very often, but I thank the government for putting that money on the table, for coming up to its obligation and looking at it from a different lens, because I think that's what it took for them to actually take some orange glasses off, maybe put some pink ones on, I don't know, but looking at it from a different angle, they were able to see that there was an avenue for this. The federal government has said on a number of occasions in my conversations with the MP that they're ready to support the infrastructure requirements at that terminal. Now, he's doing well. I've talked to him a couple of times lately. That will depend on what kind of ferry we're able to attract to the area. So it's always running into a little bit of a chicken before the egg kind of problem. But I think once we get through the RFP process that has been well underway, I think it's got a good start going here, that we'll have an idea who the operator is going to be, what kind of boat is there, and then the federal government can step in and say, all right, here's the ferry terminal that we need, here's the docking infrastructure that we're going to need, and here's how we're going to pay for it. And at that time, the counties, the town of Yarmouth, municipalities, they can jump on board and make sure that it's the right decision of how things are going to happen. Madam Speaker, you know, I wish this file had been dealt with correctly from the start. And I just wish at some point along the way, whether it's the Minister of Economic Development, whether it's the Premier, to just say to my community, to the community in Yarmouth County, just sort of say, you know, maybe we were wrong. I'm sorry. We're going to try to make this right, and we're going to work hard to do it. I know that my office is always available to anybody that calls it to help on this file. And with that, I offer my help on this. I know I probably won't get a phone call, but I'm always there to offer my thoughts on it And I know that the Minister of Health has my number, so, Madam Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleagues for speaking on this very important issue, and I certainly look forward to standing here and talking a little bit about this this resolution 2275 and how I see it impacting our province and certainly our economic development landscape. First of all, I want to say we're talking about two common things, and I think that the government's handled these two things in a very similar way, with cutting the Yarmouth Ferry and the specifically and the rural economy in general, because both have been, in my opinion, poorly managed and mishandled, and now we're backtracking to try to figure out you know, where we go with this. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I do want to mention how proud I am to stand here and in support of and next to my good friend, the MLA for Yarmouth, who, listen, he came to the legislature in a by-election, and he's represented his people extremely well. The Yarmouth Ferry is a massively important issue, and despite the politics of it all, I think we realize the effect it's had on the ground. So I'm proud of his work on this file. Since I've been here, I've listened to it, and in casual conversations we talk about it, and this is his driving force. And I just want to acknowledge his work on the ferry and on the boundaries for Yarmouth, and he's a good man, and he's doing great work for the people of Yarmouth, so I want to give him a heads up. And again, this is another, my perspective is this is another example of how the government has changed the channel. So they've made a commitment in a particular way and then changed the direction and waved the wand, and now would suggest that some of these things weren't said or weren't committed to, and I think that that's when we create these expectations and then you don't meet them and then you abandon them. These are the type of things that happen, and now the government is left to backfill on some of the decisions they've made in 2010 and certainly up until today. So again, there are two examples, and they tie into this resolution. The first one is the state of the rural economy in Nova Scotia, and secondly, it is specifically with the Yarmouth Ferry. Rural Nova Scotia is struggling. We heard the numbers today, and I will reiterate those for the House and for the debate tonight. But it's so frustrating, truly, to listen to the minister, and he has so many. He gets up in the legislature, and I wouldn't say that he answered 10% of the questions I've asked him in my 2 years economic development critic. But he says, "Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, things are great. Nova Scotians are happy. Young people are returning home for work. Things are fantastic. The economy's growing. We're so delighted. People tell us all the time how well we're doing." That is not supported by any fact that I have access to. It's not supported by numbers, and it's not supported by specific numbers, whether regardless of what your data source is, and it's certainly not supported by the people that I represent, because I see them every 2 weeks, because the other two, they're in Fort McMurray, and that's not a. That's a very real example. That used to be 20 years ago. That used to be a bit of a rarity that someone would go and come back, and now it's the way people work. So they live in Glace Bay, and their families are here, and their kids are here, and everything that they own is here, except for they got to go out west for their paycheck. So, and the reality is, we've got 31,000. These stats are pretty alarming, Madam Speaker. 31,000 unemployed people in rural Nova Scotia. 4,400 full-time jobs lost since 2009. 8,200 people left rural Nova Scotia. That is a pretty significant out-migration. And unemployment collectively in rural areas is north of 10% easily. South Shore, we heard these numbers today, 6,100 full-time jobs lost in the last 3 years, 7,800 unemployed, up 2,700 since 2009, and a 13.5% unemployment. And of course, Cape Breton, and the southern region of Nova Scotia is certainly catching up in these dire stats. We've got 3,400 that have left the island since 2009, 10,500 people unemployed, 16.4% unemployment, and we've lost 500 full-time jobs since 2009. And these are alarming statistics, and where are we from this minister and from the Economic Development Department? Well, what do we have? We have Bowater, and we have DSME, and we have Scanwood. We have these investments that have been made on behalf of Nova Scotians, and the minister again will get up and say the plan is working. Then, if the plan is working, why at 3 years later in the relative near future facing an election, why do we need experts to come from outside to tell us what we're going to do with rural economic development now. Why do we need Ray Ivany? Ray Ivany's a brilliant man. He's succeeded in everything he's ever done. He's an incredible person, and certainly as a province, we're lucky to have access to Ray Ivany. But where was this? Why was this not done in 2009? And if you had if the government didn't have a handle on these issues, then why is it that you've been telling us for 3 years that you have, and that things are growing and things are getting better? We're just not seeing it. And the minister said today that that Ray Ivany is going to, the purpose for this task force is to support jobs here. I can pretty much say unequivocally that will be absolutely false. Ray Ivany will take a very objective approach to this, and the people that are appointed to that task force, and they will make decisions based on what's best for the province and where the rural economy is going. It certainly won't be to support the government's mandate. I don't think they'll be that kind of people. They want to have an objective impact on the rural economy. So to say that these things are double speak, and the rural economy is going so well, but we need a task force to tell us how to do it, it's indicative, and so is the Yarmouth Ferry, Madam Speaker. In 2009, and I've got some articles at the table, 2009, the Premier said, the Premier disputed the town's information when the Vanguard presented it to him during a conference call this morning. Quote, "I've never heard anything of that nature," he said. "What I know is that we're about 23,000 people who came off the CAT in Yarmouth between May and October of last year. This is not just a service that is doing what needs to be done for Southwest Nova Scotia." So, end quote on that. So it's pretty clear. I don't think anyone has to read quotes or have things tabled to know where the Premier, where the government was back in 2009. So, and the Premier was very confident that this wasn't sustainable and it wasn't viable and it shouldn't be there, so it was removed. But of course, 2009, fast forward to now, we've witnessed before our eyes very, very devastating economic impacts to the South region, Southwest Nova, Southern Nova Scotia, and certainly the community, the county of Yarmouth. And with direct jobs and indirect jobs, as the MLA for Yarmouth mentioned, with hotels, retailers, food services, those types of things, and the economy is still hurting. It's still reeling from that decision, Madam Speaker. And I'm sure that the Premier, as the MLA for Yarmouth mentioned, I'm sure that the Premier is feeling that impact, and now all of a sudden he is seen to have changed his tune. And it's interesting that it wasn't on the table, and it wasn't something that we are going to be interested in. Now all of a sudden the Premier has committed $21 million over 7 years to getting a boat back in Yarmouth. So now it's a good idea. And my question would be, certainly, why did the Premier change his mind? What happened? Where was, if the expert panel have indicated that this is viable in certain conditions and there's ways to do this, then why didn't we have this expert panel assembled in 2009? Why is it now? Why is it the summer of 2012? So what we have done, Madam Speaker, in terms of economics, in terms of the community, we have allowed this decay to take place. If there's a viable ferry option, and we know that there is, then now we've lost these food services, we've lost these retailers, we've lost this economic foundation that we had in the county and in the region of Nova Scotia, and it's certainly concerning. And it's something that, as the member said, it's impacted the entire province. We heard about it in tourism roundtables with our caucus, and we also heard it in the tourism strategy session that was put together by the provincial government. So it wasn't as if it was just, us asking people. It was a very objective study that was put together. And I think that's something that is certainly concerning, that when vendors in Cape Breton and vendors in Antigonish and vendors all the way across this province are worried about it, then that's significant. And so what we're looking at, Madam Speaker, here is an impact that has really hit us hard. And I listened to the member from Lunenburg West yesterday and as well today, and he talked a lot about the world markets and the recovery, and he kind of talked a little bit about fiscal policy and a little bit about exports and all these things. And he uses the recession. And again, the idea of using a recession in this legislature has become a crutch for the government. When things are bad and they're going to get better, then it's the recession. But when you cut the Yarmouth Ferry, it's because of the recession. So by that logic, I would assume that when the U.S. economy recovers, which it will, and when the people of the U.S. spend their disposable income on things like tourism, which they do, then we will have an increased traffic back here to Nova Scotia. And if that's the case, then I think the member from Lunenburg West would agree, then I would suspect that the Yarmouth Ferry would become viable. So I think that's a very interesting idea. And the member from Lunenburg West and I have we go back and forth in here, but we certainly have respect outside and inside the legislature. And, one of the topics, and I just want to go down this road. I know I'm running out of time, Madam Speaker, but I listened to the member and he talked about the Yarmouth Ferry, and he made some points yesterday, and I want to sort of tie them into another topic. One of the most difficult times and difficult questions, certainly, I asked as the economic development critic was with respect to Bowater, and it was a very. My questions were, if you can recall from Hansard, my questions were very specific. They were about job guarantees. They were about how much money Resolute. And these are questions I made on my own because I was concerned about the very specific aspects of this deal. If the president of Resolute was given this support by the province and didn't travel down to even meet with the Premier and with the government, then that was a concern for me. And maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that was the first indication. Then when we start to look at the deals, there was really no way to ensure that these jobs would be protected, which naturally they weren't. So no one celebrated the fact that Bowater and Resolute pulled out of Queens County, but the reality is they did. And I think that it's only fair that someone that's on the opposition side, that's asking very specific, very economic-based questions about a deal, was sort of painted as though I wasn't concerned about the community, and that's a difficult thing. I mean, we've faced that so many times in Cape Breton where there's massive job layoffs and losses, and it's a tough thing to go through, and nobody wants that for any community anywhere. So I wouldn't suspect the government would say that about opposition ridings, and obviously vice versa. But the day after I asked some of those questions, the member from Lunenburg West was talking about Bowater, and he said, the same idea. I get along with the member from Glace Bay. He's a good guy, but I'm very disappointed in what he said, and he was wrong to ask those questions. I don't think that's the case. What I think the case was that I was applying due diligence to the Bowater situation and trying to understand where are the job guarantees, where are the assurances that this money is going to be well invested on behalf of the people in that region in Queens County and, of course, the taxpayers of Nova Scotia. Then the member from Lunenburg West yesterday made basically the exact same points about the Yarmouth Ferry. We just have to have due diligence. We just have to make sure that the partner's in place. We have to make sure that this thing is long-term and viable and sustainable. So if it was valid when it was about Bowater, why wouldn't the very same questions be valid about the Yarmouth Ferry? So I think that if that's the due diligence we applied, then that's what we have to look at. And finally, Madam Speaker, I know I've got a couple minutes here. I want to talk about the general direction here with the rural economy. We need a change in gears here. What we've done with the corporate welfare injections, and again, briefly, I say it, I'm on the record as saying this, I will never hide behind this. The investment, the $11 million investment of projects is a subsidy. That's exactly what it is. It's nothing more, nothing less. I know that I've taken heat over this from the Premier because I don't like the people in the gallery and I hate jobs or I'm killing jobs or what have you. This is money to compete directly with Nova Scotia firms who are already vibrant and are already successful. But when you're provided with, they can bid low and they can buy high. They can give increased wages to pluck engineers from existing firms, which they have, and they can bid lower on contracts, and that $1 million here and there will make a difference. So that's the kind of direction that we've taken, Madam Speaker, and I'm concerned about that. Let's focus on the business environment and entrepreneurs, and let's get back to small business and helping diversify the Nova Scotia economy. And with that, I'll take my seat.
Thank you. Recognize the House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. That concludes, unfortunately, it concludes the opposition business. Certainly hopeful that next Wednesday we'll have much more time to deal with the business of the opposition in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I call on the Deputy House Leader for the government to provide us with hours in business for tomorrow.
Thank you. I recognize the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I request that the House do rise to meet again tomorrow at 12 noon, with the House hours to be from 12 noon to 6 p.m. After